Welcome to The Foundry, where leaders are forged daily. Each week we investigate themes of leadership, entrepreneurship, and mindset with some of the greatest minds in real estate. And now, the data scientist of real estate, George Roberts.
Welcome back, investors. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Dan Haberkost, founder and CEO of Front Range Land. He started his real estate investing journey at the age of 21. Dan has managed to build an impressive real estate business and portfolio that allows him the freedom to live and work where he wants, well within his 20s. I know that's something that a lot of our listeners are interested in doing. So I'll say with that, let's welcome you to the show. Dan, I want to hear about your secrets. How did you do it?
Yeah, George, thanks for having me. You just want me to start at the beginning?
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely do give us some of the background. I mean, I believe you actually started well before your 21st year. I believe you're working more, maybe perhaps as an employee, but having the opportunity to see what real estate is like and what you don't like, and I'll just let you pick it up from there. You can tell us how that influenced the direction that you eventually went in.
Sure. So when I was a teenager, I managed a farm, and the owner of that farm also owned a bunch of rental properties. And after I worked for him for about a year, he gave me the responsibility of managing his rental properties when he'd spend 7 or 8 months a year in Aruba. As we talked about before, I'm from Ohio. The winters there are rough. So he'd go down south and leave everything with me. And wow, he was getting a good deal in hindsight. And that taught me a lot about the type of properties I don't want to own, because I think part of it in hindsight too is he had a bit of an unpleasant dynamic with his tenants. There were always problems, but also he just had old houses, and the constant problems that come up with old houses definitely has impacted what I've done in my own business as an adult. So did that through high school, and then in college worked at miscellaneous jobs. But the last 2 years of college, was working full-time and going to school full-time, and that was not fun. However, I managed a bunch of guys that were 10, 20 years older than me, and just managing all of that simultaneously was really useful. It taught me a lot about how to prioritize, how to get a lot done with a little bit of time, because of course, school, there was quite a bit involved there as well. And so when I was 20, 21, I think it was towards the end of my junior year of college, and I realized, okay, well, I haven't gotten to have a whole lot of fun in college. All I really did was work. But how do I take this and apply this experience in my own business of some sort as an adult to get ahead? And so I started reading different books, equities, bonds, stocks, different businesses. And like everybody else, it was when I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it was like the light bulb moment, right? And so shortly after, I went and bought a duplex as a house hack. And I was 21, and I was working full time, so I had a middle class salary, so I was able to do that. And I didn't want to stay in Ohio, so I moved to Colorado Springs, and I bought another house hack out here. And it was around that time that I realized, okay, if I really want to build a significant portfolio of buy and hold real estate, I need to figure out how to make more money. Plus, I hated having a job. And so, long story there, but I met a guy at the local real estate group out here, which I actually host now, who had been doing land and development all across the country for the last 45 years. And so I drive an hour south to Pueblo, Colorado, if anyone knows where that is, every weekend to work with him, work for him, learn from him. And at the time, he was doing a lot of new construction, spec homes, and then pre-sold homes. And eventually, I started to help him source the land for these, right? Go direct to seller via mailers to help find more lots to put new houses on. And so, of course, I learned all about construction, started participating a bit with him there. And that's ultimately where Front Range Land. So yeah, I was sourcing the land for the new builds and also helping with the new builds, learned quite a bit there. And that ultimately is where Front Range Land was born. I just took what I learned from my older friend and applied it in my own business. And so years later, I have a giant marketing funnel that goes direct to seller to buy land at a discount. A lot of the lots we just buy and sell, oftentimes probate or quiet title or all kinds of little title issues are sources of deals for us. And sometimes I'll put new construction on the lots depending on where they are. I only do that here in Colorado, the simple buying and selling is a lot in the Southeast, because the Southeastern United States is just on fire still. It feels much like 2021. And so that's the active business, Front Range Land, which is continually feeding the acquisition of more rental properties. So that's where I'm at now. Done several hundred deals all over the country.
Yeah, that's great. So just to put a finer point on it, you saw the slumlord route, decided you definitely weren't doing that, and then you did
Yes.
a little buy and hold, and decided that maybe you wanted to get maybe towards the thinner edge of the wedge, actually buying the land, getting the dirt, and figuring out what to do with it next. Well, the direct to seller route, I think that's very exciting because for our audience, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're wholesaling or buying land like you are, et cetera, that direct to seller marketing is huge. Tell us, what are some of your tips and tricks?
Absolutely. So most of our deals come from mail, and you got to think about, for the asset you're targeting, for the seller avatar you're targeting, what is that demographic? And for land specifically, especially in the Southeast, it's generally people who bought it decades ago. They tend to be older because, I mean, you buy land with cash the vast majority of the time. And so generally it's an older demographic. And so they still look at their mail quite a bit. A lot of these people, they don't have cell phones. They just have a landline still, many of them. So mail is what I use more than anything, but think about it. If you're looking for sub 2 deals in Colorado Springs, you're probably targeting millennial military people. You're probably going to have a totally different marketing channel, right?
Yeah,
And
know
then we
your
do.
audience.
Yes, exactly. I'm doing a whole talk on this tomorrow at my real estate group here in town, how to
Yeah.
build out your avatar, align your marketing and negotiation accordingly. And so we do some cold calling, but it's more very targeted, where it's either lots that we really want to get and there aren't a lot of them. So, like around Ocala, Florida right now, we're targeting lots that could be subdivided. And those ones we're going to hammer with calls, mail, call another couple months from now, another mailer, right? Because there's only so many of those. And then
All right,
we
we're going to have to come
also,
back to Ocala in a minute because I want to hear more about how you choose your markets. I actually invested first in Orlando, and I'll tell
hmm,
you, north of Orlando's great, but north of Orlando, between Orlando and Tampa, there's certain areas that are just doing so well in Florida. Florida is still on fire. It's amazing.
yep, yep.
All right,
So
but don't want to interrupt the flow. Come on, let's get back to this
it's all right.
direct to seller marketing.
Yeah. And then for my business, we get a decent amount of returned mail. And then there's also, in the CRM I use, Pebble, a portion of mailers that never get sent. It just labels them as failed mail. And so most of the time, those people are not getting mail. So we skip trace those owners and call them, because it's lower hanging fruit, because other people aren't getting their postcards to them. So short answer is direct to seller via mail is our #1 source of deals, but you really got to think about your demographic and align the marketing pieces accordingly. So I can deep dive into that if you want me to.
Well, yeah, I'd love to because I know people who do this. And a lot of people say that the idea is that you get to know people, right? I
Yes.
know people say, hey, put a picture of your family, things like that. Anything you can do to actually get to know people, it's huge because
Mhm.
what can I say? You'd rather do business with someone that you know and like and trust than anyone else.
Yep.
And that's how a lot of these deals get done. Particularly, it's a mom and pop. They don't necessarily do a lot of transactions. It's maybe the only transaction of their life.
Mhm.
This could be their nest egg, and you get to know them, and that's very powerful. So, all right, I'd love to hear you expound on that, Dan.
Yeah, I got to piggyback on that point. So I have a fourplex I'm buying. I'll close on here this month, and the seller on that is in her 80s. She's been investing since the 60s, so really interesting lady. But I initially started talking to her summer of 2022, and so that has taken a long time. And I've had to have many conversations with her. She has 40 of the nicest units in that market, and she's stuck true to this. So I haven't put it on paper. I'm much gentler with her because it's just an older lady where I don't push. But she tells me I have first right of refusal on every one of those buildings, and so far she's stayed true to that and brought them to me first. So I'm closing on the first fourplex, hoping to get more this year. But back to land specifically, so many people have come from the world of wholesaling distressed single family houses or small apartments, and they just assume the seller for land is the same. And often it's not. Again, to my point earlier, if these people were able to spend extra cash to go buy a piece of land out of state 10 or 20 years ago, most of the time they're in a stronger financial position now. They are rarely distressed. I've done several hundred of these deals, and I would put it at probably 90-10, 90% not being distressed, 10%, off the tax lien list being distressed. So that's number one. Number two, legitimacy is at the top of their list, right? Especially down in Florida. Everyone knows Florida's hot. There are so many people sending mailers that have no money, they can't close, and they have no experience with land. And so this is getting us deals nonstop. I train my acquisition people on what goes into new construction so that they can actually communicate intelligently with these sellers, because many of these sellers are retired developers who just have a few lots left. And so if they're talking to what's supposed to be a buyer, and we can't talk about perk tests and wetlands and foundation, everything that goes into new construction, they're going to not want to do business with us, so they don't think we're legitimate. So as a corollary to all that, we emphasize right off the bat, hey, George, we'll send you proof of funds. I'll introduce you to our title agent or attorney, if it's in an attorney state, that we've done many, many deals with. If we really want the lot, we'll put up non-refundable earnest. Here's our frequently asked question sheet. Here's our website. All of that has served to get us deals in these competitive markets where the sellers are so frustrated with people who are wasting their time. We got a great deal. It's going through probate right now, 5 lots, where she had previously been under contract with someone else that wasted her time. They didn't have money to close. I don't know what they thought they were going to do, because they didn't deal with going through probate, so it never would have made it through title. But anyways, point being, we got that deal entirely because we actually have the money to buy the lots and we know what we're doing. And so all that to say, this demographic just wants to see a legitimate.
Yeah.
So yeah, for that deal, we have all 5 lots under contract at $80,200. Going to spend about $7,000 on probate plus closing costs. Call it 90 grand all in. We should be able to exit just shy of $190,000, and those are lots in Florida. So these will be quick sales. So it's going to take another month or 2 to get those through probate, but we got that deal entirely because of legitimacy and experience, whereas much of the competition she didn't trust.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's great that you established that up front. I think a lot of people maybe try to skirt the issue, and that doesn't really work. If you don't establish that legitimacy, you find you just really not going down the road you think you're on. And I just love the way you know your audience. I mean, you're doing, as you said, deals differently with people depending on who you're working with. And I think that's huge, because if you don't understand the human psychology, how do you connect? I mean, I feel like that's at least 80% of it. You got to have your numbers right. You got to be ready and able to make the deals happen. But some people are able to do it, and others aren't. So anything more you have to say on that topic?
Yeah, no, I think just really taking the time to make sure every piece of your marketing is aligned, from the postcard you're sending or the cold call script to the verbiage you're using to your website, just making sure it's all congruent and it all fits with your seller avatar. Because to use that example again earlier, because this is an easy one, I live in Colorado Springs, huge military presence here, and so there's a ton of sub-2 deals that people are going after from a couple years ago when rates were 3%. People bought on a VA loan. Now they have to move, right? That's an opportunity. If that was the demographic I was targeting my marketing, my sales scripts, it would all be different, because they're mostly millennials, and a lot of them are really young, even to the Gen Z. And so mail is certainly not going to be my primary way of targeting, maybe texting or, something that's more appropriate for that group, so really, really important if you want to get deals.
Yeah, huge. And you also mentioned being able to speak the lingo. That's huge. What are some things that, I mean, I really want to ask you, what do buy and hold investors need to know about construction if you're thinking about dipping your toe in the water? But before we kind of go that route, like get us used to the lingo. You mentioned wetlands. Reminds me of here's something that's kind of going wrong in construction these days. Conservation easements got really popular a few years ago, and then the IRS sort of cracked down and said, "Hey, this is this is dirty pool." So, what are some things that people need to look out for? What should they know if you want to go into land?
Yeah. So one important distinction we need to start with, that so often people conflate raw land with horizontally developed land. And so easy example for anyone that knows Colorado. I'm sitting in Colorado Springs, down the street from me in the neighborhood I live in, there's a lot left. And there's houses on both sides, nothing wrong with it. Water, sewer, power, all right there, flat, ready to go. If I buy that lot, by right, I am entitled to go put a single family home on it if I go through the permitting process. Now, people conflate that with out east, you go towards Kansas or Nebraska, there's just endless raw land. There's no utilities. It's just zoned ag. It's huge parcels, hundreds of acres or at least 40 acres a lot of time, where there's an enormous amount of work to take land like that and chop it up, subdivide it, entitle it, bring in utilities, and get it to the point of that infill lot I just described down the street from me. And so everything that in my land business, almost everything that I target fits the first description where all of that work has been done. I watched an older friend of mine take a few hundred acres down in the northeast side of Pueblo and go through this process. And it's taken him, it's a huge subdivision, but it's taking him years and years and tens of millions of dollars to take that giant piece of raw land and turn it into a chopped up subdivision with streets and roads and utilities, right?
Right. Well, like for example, just the platting, it's going to take you
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, exactly. And this will vary a bit from municipality to municipality, depending on how much they want or don't want growth. But all that to say, in my business, I focus on lots that are horizontally developed and especially for new construction. So given that, I can go get a permit in 3 or 4 weeks, pay a few $1,000s for the plans and engineering and the few things I need. And it's very, very simple. So if you're getting into new construction, if you're looking at a piece of land, make sure is this the type of thing where I can just get the house plans, engineering, so on and so forth, and have this ready to break ground in a few months? Or is this a piece of land that I have to go to? I just did a whole podcast on this, but I'll try not to get off topic here, where I have to go through a big process with the city for years and years to entitle it to do what I want to do. So really important distinction. And if you stick with the simple shovel-ready infill, building can be very simple. And so that's the first point I want to make. Number two, let's say you have a great lot, water, sewer, power, everything's there. It's zoned for single family. You're going to build a single family spec house. So from there, the key is just finding a reliable contractor. And this is where you can really get yourself in trouble because I have a duplex being put up right now. We should get the permit hopefully in the next 2 weeks, and I'm just going to keep that one. It'll be a build and hold. And the contractor, it's actually a father-daughter. He's been building in Pueblo for decades. She's been with him for about a decade now. I've watched them build this exact building several times. They've worked with friends of mine who I know and trust. They're financially in a strong position, right? These aren't the type of people where I have to front them every dollar. So all those things, I trust these people, right? Because again, people I know personally, I've worked with them. They've built this product repeatedly. They're building all over, and this is a very easy build for them. If you're going to go do new construction, make sure that the contractor has reputable referrals. They're not new to the area. They've built a product similar to what you want to build. Look them up online, really do your due diligence there, and then be very, very clear with them as to, okay, who's doing what? Am I just funding this as we go? Or are you expecting me to, I don't know, go help get paperwork done to pull the permit? Make sure expectations are very, very clear and everyone knows exactly what they're responsible for, and there's clear timelines, and it's all outlined in a contract. So that's what I'd say as far as selecting a contractor.
Yeah, contracts are huge with contractors. Don't know that you can say enough, but you said it. Make sure you read the contract, know what it's going to cost for changes in work order, etc. All those sorts of things can be exceptionally expensive. And knowing whether the horizontal development, or I'd like to call it the underground development, having all those utilities in, well, that's huge. I mean, do you have frontage on a street, for example, is very different than your example of, or on a main street, that is to say. There's always a road, not always, but that has the proper utilities coming up to it. And if you don't, then it's the further away you are from the city, the harder things get quickly. Okay, so you mentioned that it takes a lot of time to get the land entitled, platted, to do the horizontal development, etc. Huge, huge. So time is money. What do you have to say about making land cash flow? Do you follow any other strategies for making land cash flow, or is it all just a matter of getting the shovel in there as quick as possible?
So I've sold a couple dozen lots on owner financing, and it is nice to have payments come in every month. But really, for me personally, land is more just the means of scaling my income so I can buy more and more rental properties, which is where the cash flow really comes from for me. I know people who have sold all their land on terms and have a huge amount of cash flow just from no
Right,
payments
right.
every month. So you
Yeah,
can
it
do
makes
that as
sense. I
well.
just know there are a lot of other gambits, but I love that you're focused on the construction. I think that's huge. And it's a great place to be focused. It's really the pinnacle of real estate. Without new construction, there's nothing for the rest of us to do.
Sure,
Well,
sure.
let's go back to your personal biography. In life and maybe in our society, particularly recently, excuses are just more
Mhm.
common. Like, oh, oh, you got ahead because you have rich parents or something. Well, that's not part of your
Mhm.
background. Or, people just believe that for whatever reason that they can't get ahead. And, obviously, with all those limiting beliefs in our culture and any culture, really, you obviously got around that. So, what do you think it was that made you different than other people, able to be a self-made man and successful even in your 20s?
That would go here. I'll tell you, if we're getting personal, I'll tell you a story from when I was like 5 or 6 years old that really illustrates. I'll never forget this. I was at the store with my mother. I think I was 6. It was Mark's for anyone that's been in Northeast Ohio. Mark's, a thrifty store. And I liked Sprite as a child. And I pointed at the Sprite. I said, "Mom, can I have that?" She says, "Well, of course. Do you have money?" I go, "No." "Well, then you can't have it." And that pretty much sums it up. So I have to thank my parents for that because as a kid, beyond the basics, if I wanted anything, I had to go figure out how to make the money to buy it.
Yeah.
I bought my cell phone when I was 13. I've paid for my cell phone since I was a child, since I got one. And so, yeah, I'd have to give them credit there. And then just wanting to get out of the environment I was raised in definitely pushed me. But I hated it as a teenager, right? Having to go get a job when everyone else was having fun and also college, same sort of thing. But my goodness, in hindsight, I am so glad that I had to do that and that my parents did not pay for school or anything because, I bought my car, I bought my phone, college, I paid for it in its entirety. And so that was probably the biggest reason.
Yeah, that's great. And I have to say, my observation is that the greatest inheritance is not a dollar amount, it's the values that
Mhm.
teach you how to go out and become what you want and then how to hold on to it, right? Because
Yeah.
let's be clear, it takes some means to whatever you do and wherever you are in the economic ladder to stay there. So you're really out there living the dream. I know a lot of people, probably much older than you, don't really have that sort of freedom. I mean, in some ways, entrepreneurship is freedom, getting to make your own schedule. In other ways, you can be that free if you're not afraid of working 14 hours a day. So
Mhm.
uh, I'll just lay that out there and let you take it from there. What do you have to say about entrepreneurship and finding that financial freedom?
Yeah, I think or I know it's very doable to not work yourself to death forever. I definitely did for a little while, but I think if you're really intentional, especially once you're experienced with your specific business, right? When you're new, whatever it is you're trying to do, you're a new real estate agent, a new investor, it is hard because you're clueless and you're just trying to throw something, get something to stick, something to work. But once you iterate it a few times, you know what you're doing. If you're really intentional, think of the 80-20 rule. A lot of times I think it's more like the 5-95 rule, where if you pull out those things that really move the ball forward, if you get really clear on the lead measures that make a difference, you can get a lot done in a little bit of time. And if you kind of as a corollary to all that, if you think about how to address problems upstream and think years down the road, that really helps as well. And so I have an accountability sheet that I every Monday morning. with a friend of mine. We meet, we both have one. And on that sheet, it has all of my most important lead measures for the corresponding goals for this quarter. And it's okay, hey, did you do them? Right. And so that has really helped me have a lot of freedom. And then having people on the ground everywhere allows me to kind of go wherever I want. I rarely have to be in Colorado. I usually go to California for a few months a year, going to Japan in a few months, probably go to Europe. And I'll still be working, to be clear. It's not as if I have this totally offloaded and I don't have to do it. No, I absolutely still have to participate, but I can do it remotely. Property manager here on the ground to handle the rental properties. And then the land stuff you can do mostly remotely, but we still have realtors we use in each state that we're doing business that help double check things in person. So I think just being really, really intentional about what you want to do and what actions move that goal forward, and then prioritizing those above all else can help reduce or get a lot done with not necessarily that much work.
So let's drill down a bit. What are those 5% of tasks that truly can only be done by Dan? What's really moving the ball forward for you?
Yeah, so right now, coaching with my acquisition managers to also make sure they're on top of their lead measures. I am still driving the ship as far as pulling data and then marketing to it. So I'm the one in control of where all the mail goes, and then I send in the list to be skip traced. So I'm still doing that. That's usually the first thing I do early Monday morning. But a lot of time goes into talking to and managing my acquisition managers, and then also on the money raising side of things, that is all me, because I use a lot of my own capital in my business, but not only my own capital. So we have a number of investors. So yeah, those are the big things that I'm doing. And then there's still little, you know how it is, I'm sure, little things pop up all over the board. A lot of decisions have to be made. You know, I'm
You gotta put
communicating
out
with.
some fires.
Yeah, I'm communicating with my property manager about how to handle things she's not sure of. And then any sort of analysis of potential new deals as far as buy and hold that I do. But that's kind of the fun part of business. So that's okay.
Yeah, that's huge. All right. Well, I promised that we were going to get back to markets. Markets are very important. You
Mhm,
mentioned Ocala. I know the area. I mean, anything sort of north of Orlando, it seems maybe northwest, is
mhm.
doing just amazingly well. The Villages, to name another similarly situated area. So, how do you find the best deals? Now, you mentioned you're not going to go way out in the country because that's too much work to get it properly entitled and zoned, and then get your horizontal development in. But what are your criteria? How do you figure out this is the right area? What are your criteria?
So for Ocala specifically, our realtor we use in Florida pointed us in the direction of, hey, this is really starting to pick up traction, probably almost a year ago. And he does all of our Florida stuff where he'll have a dozen or 2 dozen of our listings at any time, and he has hundreds and hundreds of land listings all over Florida. So he's got a good sample of what's going on in the state, everything south of the Panhandle. So he pointed us in the direction, and then we found some subdivisions within Ocala that had an enormous amount of sales relative. I like to, just as a very preliminary analysis, see in the last 90 days how many lots came on the market versus how many lots sold. And the ratio was ridiculous. I don't remember what it was, but significantly more had sold than had came on the market. And so I also go on PropStream and I want to see, well, has a lot of this land traded recently, or are there a ton of owners that bought this decades ago? Well, there were, I want to say, like 10,000 plus owners that had bought more than 5 years ago for pennies on the dollar that lived out of the state. And I thought, perfect. Okay, here's a finished subdivision where builders are building. Holiday Builders is there. I think D.R. Horton is there. A lot of the big guys, and then the little and mid-sized ones follow them. There's a huge amount of inventory to be turned that was bought very cheaply a long time ago, and it's only accelerating. And so all those factors kind of clued us in that, okay, hey, this is absolutely somewhere we should be marketing. So started marketing there, I think last spring, and it's been a really productive market, and it's gone up a lot in price since then already.
Right, got it. So it's not all just, hey, do they have Dollar General, Ace, or trying to think, Walmart,
Mhm.
right? These companies do a lot of demographic research. There's a lot more to it. It's also what are the owners like in the area?
Mhm.
So they've been there for a long time, held on for a long time. These are some people who have already built in a pretty decent profit, may be
Yep.
willing to sell, hopefully, for a fair price.
Yep. Yep. And yeah, so I can give you another example. There was a market in North Carolina. This would have been 2022 that I started doing business here, where I was just looking around, seeing what I could find. And on Zillow, I'd never heard of it before. I have a lot of friends in this space, so I have a decent sample, and it's rare to come across somewhere that's busy that I don't know anyone doing business in. And so I started calling around to a few realtors just to get a feel. Right? There's the quantitative, there's the actual concrete metrics, but there's also the qualitative, which talking to people is a good way to get a feel for the market. And I remember I asked one of the realtors about a lot we were looking at, and it was off market, of course, because we'd mailed to them. And they go, "Oh, no, that's not on the MLS. You can't buy that." This still makes me laugh today. But point being, the thought of direct to seller marketing didn't even occur to this person. And that was the similar sentiment I got from a lot of the people I talked to there. I run into attorneys because I've been doing business there for a while. They don't do wire transfers, they only mail checks. Yet, okay, juxtapose that with the fact that there is a massive amount of people moving there. The amount of solds compared to for sale every month is outrageous. I mean, inventory is just turning over like crazy. Yet there weren't a lot of competent people filling the demand. So that market's been great in North Carolina. So that's another sign too, where I'm doing business in some of the busiest parts, most competitive parts of Florida. Everyone knows Ocala is busy, so I don't care. I don't mind talking about it here. Everyone already knows that. And you can get deals in competitive markets, but it is nice to find less competitive places from time to time too.
All right, great. Now, how do you identify the path of progress?
Yeah, it tends to just, well, okay, take a city that's growing, and are there natural barriers? So, in I'm on the coast in North Carolina where there's an ocean in the way on the one side, right? So it tends to spread out. Well, on the coast, well, it's Brunswick County. I don't care. Everyone already knows now at this point that that's hot. But Brunswick County, if you look at that, you go south, you run into Myrtle Beach, already well known, already expensive. You go north, you run into Wilmington, already expensive. So really, the only way to grow, because there's an ocean on the other side, is inland. Or if you look at Colorado Springs, for example, Denver, well, we've just gone right down the front range because you have a huge mountain range to the west. To the east is just nothingness, so it has grown that way too. But for any market, look at the natural barriers, look at the major highways. If I was trying to do business in Texas, I don't, but if I did, I'd probably follow the major highways between the cities, and I would expect that's where you're going to see the growth.
The Texas
So
Triangle.
yeah, exactly. So it just depends on the specific market, but usually just factor in the natural barriers and then look at where the transportation is and follow that.
Love it. That's huge. Huge. I mean, you got to know where things are going. And yeah, I mean, for me, in Florida, Tampa, Orlando, I-4 is just major. I mean, you can go in both directions out towards Daytona, but I would say between Orlando and Tampa is just super hot.
Yeah.
Love that area. Yeah, some beautiful tips and tricks there. Well, let's talk about building the adventure. I mean, you spend time, you said, in California.
Mhm.
You like to go to Japan. What do you have to tell us about, I guess a lot of people just look at this like, hey, I'm going to get a whole bunch of money and then I'll be set. But you don't want to wait until you're all gray before you're living life's adventure. What are some of your tips and tricks for the personal life?
Oh, yeah. So I'm glad you asked this because I got to address the first thing you said, where people, they have these goalposts in their mind and they're just chasing that. And they think, once I reach that, right, everything's perfect. And so, as somebody who has accomplished what I initially set out to accomplish, I can tell you that's not the case. Granted, absolutely, I'm able to enjoy my day-to-day life far more than when I was stuck in a job I didn't like, when I was worried about money, so on and so forth. So, not to act like that isn't important, but it's not quite. People build somewhat arbitrary financial yard or metrics up in their head too much, right? And it's more about, in my opinion and from my experience, in continually working on new goals, working on getting better, working on improving your craft, right? And so I thought a lot about this because I journal from time to time just to kind of plan. It helps me think. And I thought, okay, well, given the fact that I have accomplished what I set out to accomplish, what would, 5, 10, 20 years from now, what would I have wanted to spend the next 10 or 20 years working on? What sort of goals should I be setting? And so at the top of that list, or the first thing that came to mind, is making sure that business is not at the top of my priority list. I always try and put all the people that are important to me first. And then I want to make sure that I'm making time for my hobbies, the things I enjoy with those people every month. And so when I plan, the quarter or the year, I schedule these trips, and those are priority. And then I make sure I get the business stuff done in and around that, right? So
Yeah, that's huge.
prioritization.
If you know that you've got only so much time to get things done, that certainly focuses you. And then if you got to go and, record and pass off these other tasks, like do it once or twice, and then say like, man, I got to get this to some assistant, some employee. Yeah, that's I think very, very helpful. Anyway, I don't want to interrupt the flow. Keep going.
Yeah. And so, I think a lot about what would, because especially this past summer, I woke up one day and I realized it had been, that was the day 5 years ago that I'd moved to Colorado. And so I thought about all the things I was planning, all the things I was thinking then. And I thought, well, given my experience the last 5 years, what would 33-year-old Dan look back and say about right now as far as what I should be working on, what's important, what I should be prioritizing? And it's so easy to get caught up in, the short-term dopamine hit, so to speak, making money right now and sacrifice the long term. And when I look at a lot of the things from when I first moved here in 2018, first really got my business going, that are most benefiting me now, they didn't for quite a while. They didn't benefit me a lot for the first few years, but have done so exponentially down the road. And this is what's so challenging about a lot of big goals, is it requires usually years of work where you get very little reward to accomplish the big things. And so I think about, for example, the first house I bought in Colorado. Wasn't that exciting, wasn't a great deal in 2018. Now it's got hundreds of thousands in equity. It makes me money every month. It's been a passive investment. It's been awesome, right? But it wasn't that great up front. Or for another example, the real estate group I host, doing that, I've been doing that a long time. And it didn't really do a whole lot up front, but now
Takes a long time to get the flywheel rolling.
Yes, that's the point I'm trying to make now, where make sure, along with, because of course you got to eat, especially if you're newer and you don't have a big cushion and you don't have passive income, you got to make money today, but or make sure you are also planting long-term seeds. And so like this build I mentioned, the duplex, it's not going to be done probably for 7-ish months. It'll be late summer this year, right? So I'm putting a decent amount of cash into that. There's some time and effort, but once it's done, it's going to make me $1,000 a month. I'll have over $100,000 in equity in it. I'll do a cost seg on it, and it'll save me 40 or 50 grand on my taxes. And right, but so you see the point I'm getting at, guys. I'm not trying to brag or anything like that. It's just a lot of the biggest payouts I've gotten have come from long term. I'm buying this fourplex. It's a great deal. I have worked on that lady for 1.5 years. All right, and I expect to be able to buy all of her properties that I want to, but it'll have been over the course of years. And so all that to say, when you're planning, don't sacrifice the long term for the short, and don't get stuck where you keep making money 30, 60 days from now, but then you have to go do it again. Make sure you're planting long-term seeds in every aspect, relationships too, not just rental properties.
Beautiful. Well, your example proves that it's possible. So yeah, far from bragging, I'm glad that you were just very frank about getting into what it takes to make it happen. And once it does, yeah, every stream of income is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Well, I want to give you an opportunity to promote some of the things that you've been doing. You've been going out and creating some valuable, or I think some of these may be new. I don't know if you've launched this yet, but your Ground Up Partners in TBPB. Is that a podcast?
Yes. So the Big Picture Blueprint I host with, I have a co-host, Mason, and we interview people across the board who own businesses, and that tends to, or ideally is focused more on a 202 or 201, not a 101. We're not defining every term. It's supposed to be more of an advanced podcast for people who are already in the business. And then number 2, Ground Up Partners. That is a capital provider where, again, my partner Mason and I, if you have a land deal, you don't have the funds for it, you can bring it to us and we'll partner with you and provide the capital.
Okay, yeah, huge. So kind of like a coaching program, or is this just capital?
Oh, no, ideally just capital is what we're
Okay.
really focusing on. Yeah. Yep.
All right. All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. So with that, I'd like to head into our final 7. You ready?
Yep.
All right. If you could be known for just one thing, Dan, what would that be?
Oh gosh, that's a big one. Known for one thing, sharing. I'd like to not be the traditional, sort of cutthroat business owner. More so, I prefer the collaborative sort of approach. So, I guess that would be my answer.
What's the greatest lesson in leadership you've learned as an entrepreneur?
Oh, yeah, you got to take the time to get to know your people on a personal level and coach and help them on a personal level. And there's, yeah, you can't be, again, just, I have such a uh, uh, negative opinion of how businesses were ran for most of history. I prefer a more collaborative approach, less ego. And so I think that's really important when managing, hiring, training people. You got to remove your ego and work with them personally.
Personal characteristic has been most pivotal to your success, Dan?
Persistence.
All right. All right. Let's mix it up a little bit. I got these random questions here. Just let me know when to stop cutting the deck.
Okay, go ahead. Let's grab one.
All right. Top of the deck. What remains undone that you've wanted to get done for years?
Oh, stop buying residential properties, move into commercial strip centers.
Right.
Yep.
All right. Give us a tip or trick that investors can implement in their business today.
Persistence, man. Going back to that, most of the deals we get 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road. So I think most people quit way too soon. And when you identify a seller, assuming we're talking direct to seller, that is your avatar. Tactfully following up over the course of years is how you close deals.
Can you name a book that's helped to forge you as a leader or as an entrepreneur, and why?
I have a lot of different ideas, but Same as Ever is a recent one that I just read. And I think it's extremely helpful because it's really about human nature, right? Amongst all the rapid change in technology, what are the things that never change? And so, really, that's what that book is about. And I think that's incredibly useful, understanding human nature and how much none of what is going on, on a worldwide scale, is new or different or unique. It makes the headlines far less scary, and it's really useful when coaching and training people.
Okay, so before we wrap, send us out with a quote to help forge our listeners as leaders and entrepreneurs.
Oh, quote, man, these are hard ones. Okay, Alex Hermosi, and I don't know if this came from him originally, but it was on one of his podcasts. This is very applicable to me. Mistakes love a rushed decision.
Oh, love it. Hormozy is great. Well, I hope that this episode breaks the internet, but whether it does or not, how about this? We'll mix it up one more time. Okay, I love to do this thing. Flip a coin, and if you get to call it. So if it lands on your chosen side, we'll ask you something deep. Otherwise, something prosaic. So heads or tails.
Heads.
All right. All right. Let's see. Now, if I'm good at this, I should be able to. Can you see it? Okay. So tails.
Okay.
All right. So here, we'll just ask you something very commonplace. What's your favorite color?
Blue.
All right, mine too. Look at this. Got the blue shirt.
Yeah.
Got to have the black background though. That makes it much easier to match. Much easier to match.
Sure.
All right, great. So here, now we got to make sure everybody's able to reach out to Dan Haberkost. So email, website, carrier pigeon, smoke signals. What's the best way to get in touch with Dan?
danhaberkost.com, or find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook.
All right, amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience with our audience.
Thanks for having me, George.